Greetings, booktubers, and welcome back to Grammaticus Books. Welcome to a book review edition where we're going to be talking about Pierre Boulle, the French author's book, The Marvelous Palace. Now, I don't own this book. A little bit of a backstory on it. This is a loaner. And how I came by this book is I work in a large building in a downtown metropolis, and nobody there is aware that I have a booktube channel. I don't tell anybody. And despite that, one of the employees in the building stumbled on my channel quite by accident. It was the 1 in a million shot, literally the 1 in a million shot. And after viewing my channel, he approached me and he says, "Hey, I saw your channel, and based on the content of your channel, I've got this book by Pierre Boulle called The Marvelous Palace, and I think it will be up your alley. I think you would like it." And he described the book to me, and I was like, "Yeah, sure, that sounds interesting. Why don't you drop it off?" So he dropped it off about a week and a half ago, and I just finished it this morning. And I have to admit, when he handed me the book and told me that the author was Pierre Boulle, I had never heard of Pierre Boulle before. It hadn't registered. It had zero name recognition for me. I didn't know who he was. I didn't know anything about his bibliography. And he hands me the book here, and then right on the front dust jacket of the book, it says Pierre Boulle, author of The Bridge Over the River Kwai and Planet of the Apes. And I read that, and immediately my interest in this book doubled right there on the spot, and I knew that I was going to have to read this right away, and I did. A little bit of a background on Pierre Boulle. He's an interesting guy. He was born in 1912 in France. He dies in 1994 in Paris, France. But he wrote The Bridge Over the River Kwai in 1952. He wrote it based on his own personal experiences in World War II, because when the war broke out, he was working in Singapore as a French engineer. And he also became a member of the French Free Singapore movement. And he was captured. And I'm assuming that the Japanese had no idea that he was a French agent at that time, or they probably would have killed him on the spot. But instead, they inter him in a prisoner of war camp, and then he's placed into a forced labor camp. And it was his experiences as a forced labor prisoner working under the Japanese in World War II that led him to write the book, The Bridge Over the River Kwai, about the infamous death railway that the Japanese forced thousands and thousands of prisoners to work on, and thousands of prisoners lost their life. And of course, it was a massive hit. It was a massive success as a book, and it was translated into a massive hit as a movie, The Bridge Over the River Kwai. He follows that up in 1963 with The Planet of the Apes, and you know the story there. A fantastically written book. It's a fantastic success. It becomes a major motion picture. It becomes an entire theme of pictures. It's got its own franchise, and in fact, they just released another Planet of the Apes movie last week, I think it was, and I'm going to go see it Tuesday. So he's a huge author, but in addition to these two gigantic books, he also wrote about 24 other novels during the course of his career in his bibliography, and he also wrote a number of collections of short stories, and that's what this book here is, The Marvelous Palace. It is a collection of 6 short stories, originally published in France in 1976, and this is the English translation that was done in 1977. And the translator, I need to give a shout out to the translator. The translator was Margaret Giovanelli, and she did a phenomenal job translating this from the original French into English because it reads beautifully. And I'm assuming that it's very faithfully translated. So that is Pierre Boulle. That's the book. One thing, I did look this book up on Goodreads. It has a rating of 3.67 on Goodreads out of 5 with 3 ratings. So it does not appear to be a book that went into wide circulation or that's widely popular, but it's a very interesting book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. It is written with just a freshness, with just a wonderful set of prose, with a literary flourish in it that just makes it enjoyable to read. And the 6 stories that are enclosed in here, the 6 stories that are contained in this book, they're all independent stories that are written by Pierre Boulle, but at the same time, all of them are interconnected. And the means by which they're interconnected is through the author himself, because the book is written through the eyes of Pierre Boulle. He has writer's block. That's the basis of this book. He's got writer's block. He's living in Paris, France, and in order to break his writer's block, each night, in 6 nights in a row, he goes out into the streets of Paris and tries to find this companion of his who he refers to simply as the old man. And the old man is a former resident. He's a former priest and minister of the fictional country of Shandong in Southeast Asia, where he was the minister of the religion of doubt, which is just a great title. And Pierre knows that this guy, he says he's a centenarian. He says that he was a priest and a former minister of this religion of doubt. And Pierre Boulle knows that he stretches the truth, that sometimes he can be an outright liar, but he's so desperate for an original thought that he seeks this man out 6 nights in a row. And it's the tale written through the perspective of him sitting down with this individual each night and talking to this individual, trying to draw these stories out of him, and then eventually drawing these very interesting stories out of this old man, which then get recorded here in the book, The Marvelous Palace. And I would describe the stories here. They're not horror stories per se, but I would describe them as macabre fiction. Macabre fiction with a twist ending to each of the 6 stories. And the twists are, it's a little bit of a cliche plot format, but it works very well. And Pierre Boulle writes so wonderfully, so beautifully. It's so easy to read. It's such an intelligent read, but at the same time not being pretentious, that it just makes it a joy to read through these stories and read about not just the stories that are related by the old man, but to the social interplay between Pierre and the old man as he tries to draw these stories out, and he's trying to figure out how much of these stories are truth and how much of them are just made up, and how they can work each other back and forth in order to get what each one wants out of the evening's festivities and camaraderies. So the 6 stories, what are they? I'm going to go through them very briefly. There will be some spoilers. So the 6 stories are in order of how they appear here in the book. The first one is The Royal Pardon. And this is about a common woman living in the city, or not the city, but the country of Shandong. And her son is on death row. And it's implied that he's on death row mistakenly, that he's been unjustly accused and is now facing the death penalty. However, the Queen of Shandong is notoriously anti-capital punishment, and they are expecting for a pardon to come through and that her son is going to be pardoned. But what they're not counting on is that the Queen of Shandong also has a son whose life's in danger. And then this competition between this common lady and the Queen of Shandong then ensues to see whose motherly love is strongest, who can come up with the plan and the machinations in order to save their son. And it has a nice twist to the end, as I'll do all 6 of these stories. And that's how it kicks off. The next story is The Marvelous Palace, which is the title of the book here, the titular story. And it is about the minister, I think it's the minister of statistics, who is the most powerful minister in Shandong, comes up with a plan to create a 100-acre site just outside the main capital of Shandong in order to create the most wonderful pleasure palace that you could possibly imagine for the execution of Shandong's prisoners on death row. And all the other ministers join into this plan. They come up with this fabulous palace that has a conveyor belt that just takes these death row prisoners from one fabulous stop to the next fabulous stop to make their final hours on the face of planet Earth the most wonderful that you can imagine. They're going to turn it into a tourist attraction. They're going to accept prisoners from other countries that have come into this marvelous palace that they construct. And they construct the palace, they have it all ready to go, but they haven't counted on one thing that throws everything into chaos and disruption. And that's the twist at the end of that story. So that's The Marvelous Palace. It's the title story here. It's the title of the book because it does get credited as the best story in the book, but I do not think it is the best story. It's very good, but there's another story that I think is better. So the third story is The Law. And this, in my opinion, is the weakest of the 6 stories. And it's about a traditional dancer of Shandong who dances in the traditional cultural tradition of the nation and is just revered as an icon. But she becomes pregnant and she violates the laws of Shandong and she winds up on death row. And the story is about how far she will go in order to try to commute her sentence, in order to try and reestablish her position. How far can she sink and fall from this position of just being an icon in the country of Shandong? And I didn't particularly care for it. I did think it was the weakest of the stories. So that was story number 3. Story number 4 is The Limits of Endurance. And this is about a man, a baron in Shandong. And Shandong, as the old man is describing it, sounds amazingly like France. And all of the stories take place in the capital city, which sounds amazingly like Paris, France, even though it's in Southeast Asia. But you have this baron in Shandong and his wife has been stricken with muteness. And in addition to muteness, she has contracted a disease that is terribly painful, horribly painful, and she has 2 months to live. And the question becomes, what is her limits of endurance? What is the limits of endurance that she can take? And how far is her husband willing to let her go before he will consider euthanasia? And again, it has a twist ending to it that's pretty good in that story. I did like that one. That takes us to the fifth story, and the fifth story is the compassion service. And I did think that this was the best of the 6 stories. It's the one that I like the best. And in this story, the old man has become suicidally depressed. And Shandong offers a service, the compassion service, which is a phone-in call-in line where you can call in and you get an operator, and the operators will listen to your woes and will console you and then try to convince you not to commit suicide. So the old man is in his 70s. He's becoming depressed with life. He calls into the compassion service and he develops a very close relationship with one of the operators of the compassion service. So much so that he eventually gets invited to come to the compassion service and meet with his operator, the certain Mansour, who is the one who has been dealing with him. And he gets there and he winds up being recruited to be an operator, a telephone operator in the compassion service. And everything is going spectacularly well. He's having some of the best times, the most enjoyable and relaxing times of his life, until a certain phone call comes in. And the ending to it is just sort of delicious. I like this one a lot. It was my favorite. So that brings us to our 6th story, the final story in the book, and that is titled The Angelic Monsieur Hyde. And this is just a retelling of the classic story, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that was written by Stevenson. I think Stevenson is the author. And in this story, the old man has made an acquaintance with a scientist in the country of Shandong who has perfected Dr. Jekyll's formula, to where as Dr. Jekyll had messed up the formula and it created Hyde, this persona of pure evil when he was trying to separate out the personalities. This scientist in Shandong has perfected it, and his formula will separate out all the bad qualities, leaving a person with only their angelic qualities and only those qualities that leave them with a desire to benefit people and be the best person that they can be. And this scientist takes the drug, he takes this pharmaceutical, and it in fact works, and it makes him this angelic, beatific person bent solely on doing good. But by eliminating out everything else other than these good qualities, he actually becomes just as horrible a person as Hyde from Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And it has a very interesting twist ending to the end of it as well. But those are the 6 stories here with The Marvelous Palace of Pierre Boulle. I enjoyed it very much. If I come across other stories by Pierre Boulle, I would certainly pick them up based on the quality of the prose. It was just a joy to read these 6 short stories. They're all very quick. You can read them about 20 minutes. It did get a 3.67 rating on Goodreads off of 3 reviews. So if anybody out there has read The Marvelous Palace, I would love to hear their thoughts on it. Or if you've read anything else by Pierre Boulle, I'd love to hear what you think about him as an author. Please put it down in the comments section. I do read and try to respond to all the comments. And with that, I'm going to wrap this one up and say take care, be safe, and I'll catch you guys next time.